So we're going to do a quick activity. If everybody would please stand up. Now we're going to do 10 jumping jacks. Just kidding. All right, I'm going to say a series of words. And if you know the meaning of the words, remain standing. If you don't, sit down. Total recordable incident rate. So there's very few. Good. Greenhouse gas emissions. Scope 3. I was hoping more would sit down. Good. Board overboarding. All right, last one, impact valuation. Annalisa, this is cheating because you know the answer. All right, so as I said those words, right, there's a varying knowledge in terms of what are those topics, what do they mean, and how do they impact you? As you think about them, they are in terms of the maturity model. So as you begin your journey on sustainability, you'll understand what each of those means. So as we think about it, I actually had a conversation with a supplier about 2 weeks ago, and that supplier called and said, "Hey, Kim, I really love your sustainability report. How do I do that?" Okay, that sustainability report is 78 pages long. I believe it's actually 80. It covers multiple topics, hundreds of people input into that document. Oh, and by the way, making it design and look really pretty. That is something that has, even at John Deere, we've been on a maturity piece to get us to that point. If you look 5 years ago, that sustainability report was 6 pages. And our corporate comms manages it. It's now to the point where we have to involve the business in order for us to keep going. So as you think about it, okay, why do we even create this maturity model? What piece did it benefit? The idea is we want, as suppliers, to move along this journey with us. When you think about it from a CNH, a Cummins, and a John Deere, we've been on this journey substantially longer. We've been on this journey for 10, 15, 20 years, whereas some of you, shown by how much do you understand the language I just used, maybe at the very beginning of your maturity model. So we want to make sure that we can accelerate faster than what we did as OEMs. So that's why between the three of us, we created it. So when you look at the maturity model, so that piece of paper that John had you pull out and look at, you can follow along as I kind of talk through it between Karen and I. And we really look at it from the perspective of this is a starting point. This is not meant to be fully prescriptive. This is not meant to be, hey, this is explicitly what you need to do. It's meant to give you a starting point. The supplier that I mentioned earlier, I said, well, how did you even get into sustainability? She said, well, my CEO said, hey, I need you to make this report. Okay, I said, did you do internet searches? Yeah, what'd you find? A lot. So when we look at this maturity model and look at kind of an XY type of perspective, as you look at the X, there's a maturity level. So we'll go from compliance to efficiency, efficiency to leadership, leadership to purpose. And then on that left-hand side are the attributes. So Karen and I are going to go through mainly the attributes, and as you step through each of those different levels of the maturity model, what does that mean? So once again, as you think about this from your own company, think about, okay, when Kim says in motivation, in efficiency, we're talking about this topic, do I sit there or do I sit somewhere else? So keep in mind, as a company, there are certain things at John Deere. We sit in the purpose. There are other things we sit in the leadership. All right, so I'm going to kick us off. I'm going to start in the motivation part. So when we talk about motivation, we talk about compliance, it's all about risk management. Right? We want to make sure that we can sell to the countries we want to sell in. We want to make sure that our customers actually purchase our products. Oh, and by the way, making sure we meet those regulations that the lovely US federal government as well as the EU creates for us. When we migrate from compliance into efficiency, that's really about making our businesses more efficient. So are you using less energy? Are you using less water? Oh, and by the way, there's a cost benefit to that too. When we migrate from efficiency to leadership, this is really where companies start to give back. Meaning, okay, we did some bad things, we really want to get better at it, so how do we do that? This is where a lot of things around social starts to come in. And then when we really think about purpose, think of these as the very forward-leaning companies. If you're familiar with Patagonia, Patagonia sits in purpose. So really about looking at a societal as well as an environmental perspective across the board. So you move down to the next one, boundaries. And this is, once again, a lot of this is built out of personal experience because we've done it ourselves. If you go out and try to find this, you won't. Boundaries, really looking at your facilities and operations. What's happening within your four walls? Are we shutting off the lights? Are we running most efficiently? Are we making sure our people are safe? Efficiency, really starting to look at what's happening in your surrounding communities and those communities that you operate within. When we transition to leadership, that's really where we start to get into the value chain conversation. So when Josh says, hey, we need your suppliers and we really need, you're part of our value chain. So if we look at like John Deere's value chain, we have our suppliers where we start at, our own operations. Oh, by the way, we have distribution in between. And then we even get down to our customers, looking at what is the larger impact that your organization has on sustainability, not just within your own four walls. Whereas when we really get into the purpose, once again, much more forward-leaning, this is where what is your general impact on society as a whole? So with that, I'll hand it over to Karen to talk about accountability.
Great, thank you. So when we get into accountability, we're really talking about accountability and control. Like, where does this sit and how are you measuring it? And so when, oh, can you hear me okay? Okay. So when you're thinking about compliance, so if someone, just kind of tapped you on the shoulder and said, hey, can you go figure out sustainability, like this supplier, right? You're in that little maturity curve from compliance to someone wanting you to go to efficiency, right? And so think of that.
Back up that way a little bit.
So you'll have an accountability. You will have KPIs generally, but they could be defined, not well defined, right? It's more HSE or EHS type work. When you get into efficiency, though, you're getting more into, you have more at a functional level. So you have KPIs and you're working towards that, but it's more HSE, very HSE driven in the beginning. And you may have we had one for customers, but it was, a functional for customer engineering. So it's not across the board yet at this point. You get into leadership, and as Kim explained, you're going beyond environment. Now you're setting goals and KPIs for social, for governance, right? You're starting to have these discussions with the top management of, hey, we actually need to include, sustainability as part of your pay, those kind of uncomfortable discussions, right? You're starting to have those. And you're really taking this across. Now, when it gets to purpose, and you think about accountability, you're going across KPIs for the entire business, right? Think of the purpose as it's actually as much about the environment as it is the dollars, and so you're setting KPIs for that level, and you're trying to stay within planetary boundaries. See, that's when you have a mic drop. Right before you say planetary boundaries. All right, now for, we get into ownership. So this is like a bingo card. So if you would go ownership and compliance, right? This is your part-time person working on sustainability and trying to make things happen. They're very confused and they are Googling, right? I started Googling, that's how we learned what we're doing, by the way, right? We Googled. We're hoping that this maturity curve and these links that we're going to talk about in a minute will help you Google the right things, right? And so efficiency then for ownership, you now have a dedicated sustainability professional. So I was that person that Brian hired, right, in 2012, right? So it's like, oh, well, let's have more KPIs, but we just expanded, right? More in HSE. So it's beyond the one for energy in 2006. We went energy, wastewater, we went, all the normal things. But then you get into for leadership, for ownership, right? So now it is like top level leaders asking the questions, right? Really pushing. You're meeting with the board. You have the Brian Morminos of the world really taking this and holding it and holding other top leaders accountable for it. And so very important. And then another thing with the leadership and ownership, you're starting to see corporate strategy and sustainability talk, right? They never talked to sustainability when we were functional ownership, right? Those types of KPIs. When you get into the purpose level, we think that you're going to see a total alignment with sustainability and corporate strategy together, right? It's not separate. It'll be the same thing.
So perfect example just of that, right? If we look at John Deere and the sustainability journey that we've been on, our board of director gets updates on sustainability every quarter. We present to CEO staff about every other month on what are you doing, what roadblocks do you have, what challenges do you have, and us as leaders, how can we encourage you? They also get external reporting, my favorite and or least favorite thing. That used to be my job, where all I would take care of is creating that 80-page sustainability report. So when you start in compliance, it's really about how are we reporting to those systems, say for instance like the CDX that Josh was talking about, are we reporting the information that our customers are asking for us? Whereas it's very reactive. There's not a lot of proactive ownership in terms of controlling your narrative, owning what is your sustainability message. Also, you may see those special requests come in from investors and customers. Actually, I have another meeting with one of our customers next week where they want to know, Kim, talk to us about what is John Deere doing for electrification? What are you doing around alternative fuels? What's your strategy? So when we think about moving from compliance to efficiency, you're going to see that there's really some other ways to formulate. So as you think about creating your first sustainability report, it's really a good starting basis point is Global Reporting Initiative, also known as GRI. This is when we start getting into the alphabet soup of sustainability. You also want to make sure that you're actively responding to an organization called CDP, or formerly known as Carbon Disclosure Project. Now, if you aren't getting requests today, more than likely you will get requests in the future. CDP is heavily around climate change. There's also water, there's also supply chain information. So don't be surprised if in the future you get requests for CDP. As we think about moving from efficiency to leadership, this is where you really may see some requests come if you're a public company from those investor analysts. So those investor analysts or fund managers are going to say they're going to hire companies, you may hear the acronyms MSCI, ISS, Sustainalytics. You're going to get asked a whole bunch more questions about all the different topics related to sustainability. Once again, it also means that you are very proactive in your messaging. If you read our sustainability report, you'll note how we talk about, in our speak internally, we call it, do we have the stories part and do we have the technical part? The stories part is us telling the narrative, meaning what is our larger impact on sustainability outside of our operations, whereas the technical copy are things like, hey, we have an environmental management system that's in compliance with 14,001, and we have X amount of sites that are verified. Very heavily technical, whereas what we found is investors really appreciate, hey, this is the bigger picture of the things that we're working on as an organization and how they play into sustainability. When those in leadership transition from leadership to purpose, really looking at, hey, there's that magical word I mentioned earlier, impact valuation. Starting to look at, hey, can we actually put a dollar amount to the social impact or the environmental impact we've had? Looking at products that are fully traceable, meaning going back to that digital passport that was mentioned earlier today, can we actually get to that point where if you scan a QR code, you know explicitly where that product came from and all the individual pieces? And then my favorite one, this is new one that we actually just started here at Deere, sustainability bonds or sustainability linked bonds. Those are ones where if you do issue debt It is an opportunity to connect your sustainability KPIs to the performance of a bond. So this is where we're beginning to really see the financial and the sustainability come together. So as you may think, well, Kim, that's great, you want to talk about external reporting, but what do I even put in it? Right? What does that look like? Once again, from a compliance perspective, making sure you're filling out those requests that you get from us as OEMs. Start looking at your facilities and operations. What are topics that are really impacting them? More than likely, electricity is a large part of what your overhead costs are. What is your electricity consumption? What's your natural gas consumption? As always, looking at occupational health and safety, right? That's fundamental to all of our businesses. When you transition into efficiency, that's where you really begin to see things like greenhouse gas emissions, energy consumption even more so, renewable energy, water efficiency, and things like recycling and waste management. Transitioning to leadership, like I mentioned earlier, this is where you really start getting into the social aspect. So can you tell me the breakdown of your companies between males and females? Can you tell me the breakdown of minorities versus whites? Can you tell me your breakdown versus age? Those are the types of things that come into the topics you need to understand, as well as looking at governance, cybersecurity, data privacy. All are pieces when you start to get into leadership are questions that you're going to get. Last topics, when we really think about purpose, and I'll say this in terms when we think about purpose collectively, this is still being developed. We have the leaders out there in the industry. We are learning things every day. So we really want to make sure. So making sure that they're having a net positive over the entire business history. The only company that we have seen has done that is Microsoft. It's pretty easy when you don't actually make something, right? Physical. Also making sure that employees make a living wage. Yes, living wage is different from minimum wage. So looking at those topics from a much more societal and planetary differences. Keep in mind, I keep emphasizing that purpose is still developing. You want to talk about the top sustainability leaders, they are in that purpose level. So with that, Karen will talk about actions and tools.
Very good, thank you. So we get into actions and tools. So this is a good way to know if someone's talking to you about something you don't understand, right? It could mean that it's way over here. Let's say an employee comes in and say, hey, I've heard about living building. Can we do living building? And it's like, well, yes, one day we will, but not now, right? Because it's way over here. But it gives you something of, hey, it's not that we're missing something. It's like there are things that we need to get done now, and that is part of our own maturity curve to get to that piece. So when you look at the actions and tools, and this is going to be a key part of where the industry is going to provide the value, right, from AEM, because they're going to help us develop this toolkit with this in here, right? And that's what Julie's going to talk about next. And also, what are the different things? So we'll be developing through the Sustainability Council those different tools for you, right? So one of the things we're going to talk about this afternoon is the code of conduct. Right, here's an example. You can take it, it's the template. Just borrow which pieces you want, right? And you don't have to recreate. And that's going to be the beauty of all this and what we're working on. So the compliance piece, you are hearing about the code of conduct, the EHS policy, REACH, ROS type stuff. And then, as you're going on for efficiency, so what's that 2006 goal look like, right? It's about goal setting. And it's really important. In a way, you almost have to go through this, right? If you start from compliance and you try to set a science-based target, well, it's rough, right? It's rough if you've been doing it, for however many years Cummins has been doing it. It's still really rough, right? And so this next piece is efficiency and learning how to set goals, really starting to look at the life cycle. It was the first time we did the life cycle analysis and hotspot analysis of understanding where our biggest impact is, right? Where should you set goals? Then you get into the leadership piece of it and these actions and tools, like materiality assessment. I remember when I first went to Brian, it's like, hey, there's a materiality assessment we need to really understand. He's like, where do they come up with these words? I was like, I don't know. Why don't they just call it, what is it, right? But it's really about looking at your stakeholders. It's the most important thing you can do. When you go through the SDGs and you look at all those trends, right? The most important thing we did for Planet 2050 was to look at here's the trends, big scary stuff, right? That you have to take, it causes wine drinking, right, when you first get into it. So you look at that, and then I took a look at, like, what does Cummins say about these different things, about our stakeholders? So each stakeholder, I did that. Like, here's what will impact them. Here's what Cummins says it does. Like our leaders say, right? And then the plan started writing itself. Right? We say we're only as strong as the communities in which we live and work. Well, guess what? Then, all right, if all these things are going to happen to our communities, and they're not even prepared, they don't even understand that this is what's going to impact them, right, through climate models, they have no way of knowing what to prepare for. So that's our role, if this is what Cummins says. So it literally started writing itself. So understanding these words, thinking from a stakeholder impact, looking at science-based target, scenario analysis, right? Whoever thought we would all get there, right? From sustainability strategy, from way back when. But these are the things that we're working on. And then you get into purpose. And like Kim said, I think she said it perfectly, right? We have an article in the toolkit, right? It just kind of explains where it's going. Today, I'm gonna fall off. I just got over breaking my wrist, so I'm like, I'm not gonna fall this way. But when we're thinking about it now, like a publicly held company can't get to where some of these things are today for purpose. We're sticking our toe into it, right? But the economics don't allow for it right now, but it will. Right? When you think about remanufacturing, and we saw the water scarcity, that type of information, and how it's going to expand. And we see that most of our water footprint is in raw material extraction and processing. All that metal we need. Guess what? For the low carbon transformation, it's metal, mineral intense. I'm like, oh my gosh. So we need more materials for low carbon. It's causing water stress across, right? So I don't need the regulation to tell me that we have to be smart about how we use materials. Right? You have to go through and think of that up front, because by the time it hits with the regulation, these things are too hard, right, to really put into play. So if you look at those trends, you look at these different types and where you're going based off stakeholder, right, you can actually figure this out, and it's not as hard as it seems. And anyway, so all of this will be provided free, for members. And we want, as an industry, to win, right? We want our industry to be, the sustainable one. Now, when you get to ISO standards, and I had a really good conversation with Keith about this, right? When you go to a sustainability conference, by the way, it's a lot of women, by the way. It's mainly women. So it's a very interesting field. When you go there, you do not hear one single person say ISO 14,000. Zero. There's zero ISO talk at all. And that's actually, like, I had to scratch my head when I first joined the group. I'm like, so, okay, yes, that's important, right? But we got all these things. But it's actually really important for that the industry group gets it, right? So if you're ISO 14,000, like, that's what we have our suppliers. That's what we say to our suppliers. Go be ISO 14,000 right now until we get it figured out. And then go figure out, do a CDP water, because you need to know where water scarcity is going to impact you, right? So to me, that was the bottom level, make you successful for the future. So these ISO standards are really important, and you can see the ISO 14000 environmental management system. It's about the environment, but it's about the process, right? It's the process of setting goals. What's your biggest area? So if you follow that, then you will have a sustainability plan. That one is mainly about environment, but then you can go over to these social responsibility standards, and they will help you figure out what you need to do, right? So they're actually quite important, and I'm trying to help other sustainability leaders, realize their significance. So, as we said, ISO 14000 doesn't get enough credit for how much it really pushes an organization. So this is the model. And, I would have loved to have had this blueprint when I started. And, through this, when we were creating it, I had this like major aha for areas, because honestly, you're change agents. That's what you're doing. You're leading long-term change. You know where you need to go, but you can't make that much change all at once. You have to plan the change, where you're going. And so, and I don't show that plan to very many people because it freaks them out, right? To be honest. And so, but what we need to do next with all of this is make sure that you have the toolkits. Take this with you, right? So that when like the person I freaked out, that we're here, just starting here, and I'm telling them something from over here, right? If it's a lesson to me, don't do that, right? That does not work out well. But that's where you're going, right? And that's what a sustainability strategist, that's what we have to do to know where you're going. And so the next steps for this is making sure that you use this, use the toolkits, right? Work with AEM. We want to make sure that we get that. And then we want to take another level. And that's some of the stuff that Josh was talking about, and Kelly were talking about with getting the data, right? Scope 3 data is our new best friend, right? So we have a Scope 3 new product goal. Like they literally, you can't say Scope 3 in the goal. And I'm like, no, we're saying Scope 3 in this goal, right? You have to say Scope 3. When no one understands it, I don't care, right? People will care. And so getting to the Scope 3 and what we have to do with this, that is where the industry group is going to be our kind of, horse, the knight in shining armor coming through. So thank you.
So I think one thing is important for this group to know. I know we had some conversation about Scope 3, so just remember that a company like John Deere, if you're a supplier to us, you're in our Scope 3, which means that your Scope 1 and 2 greenhouse gas emissions, which is things like your electricity that you utilize, the natural gas that you burn, we get to include that in our Scope 3. So now, you will also have Scope 3, but as you go through this maturity model, keep in mind efficiency really start with Scope 1 and 2. I can't emphasize that enough. For those that were at the components meeting last week, right, what was the one thing I told you? Focus on greenhouse gas emissions and look at Scope 1 and Scope 2 if you do nothing else with this model. Because at the end of the day, that is where you're going to be seeing the pressure coming, not only from OEMs, but even other customers you may have. Any questions within the group? I know this is a lot of content to consume in one space.
Kim, is your 80-page sustainability report available to the public? I'd really like to see the fruits.
Yes. Yes, it is. You can go find it at deere.com/. Yes, it is. If you just, John Deere Sustainability Report. I'll even get a shout out to Cummins and CNH. Now, I will put a little doubt. CNH, you got a 300-page report. Even I don't like reading it. But it is important to know what they put out there. So I think they're great reports. You can go out and see. Now keep in mind, I just start with the basics, right? You have to remember, these reports are years in the making.
I'll read the first 6. That's what
Yeah.
So where do your companies fall on this maturity model?
That's a hard question. You go first.
Yeah, I think we kind of stick our toe in purpose a lot, right? But mainly in the leadership level, with some nods over probably, I don't know, 1/3 of the way purpose. How about that? Yeah. And then you can find ours out there too. They're usually very public documents. And also, if you're interested in Plant 2050, there is our strategy document of how we created it. And it's available publicly. So please go find that too.
From a Deere perspective, I'd agree. There are certain things we're in leadership, and then there's certain things that we're in purpose. So I'll say probably, this is a tooting my own horn at this point, but we actually issued our first sustainability-linked bond last week. It was $600 million. To me, that's a lot of money. My accounting and finance team and the treasury group said, Kim, that's minimal. Okay, that's great. But still, we actually were able to issue one. So that's pretty cool, the fact that we now have different parts of the business who we traditionally would never have conversations with start to go, how can we embed this in what we do? So that's the cool part. As we're having conversations, you hear the word, how do we operationalize sustainability? If you look at Deere, now keep in mind, we only created a corporate sustainability organization in the last 6 weeks. Before then, I was the only person within the company that all I did was environmental social governance. I had no free time. But I worked with our subject matter experts throughout the organization. They are the ones who know the knowledge, the deep pieces. I just help bring it together. So you'll see that within your own organization. We used to sit in environmental health and safety. When it came to sustainability, we had lots of org changes, imagine that. So it got shifted around, but that's where it started. And now it's grown to the point where it's owned by its own group. We actually report into accounting and finance, which you say, Kim, why do you sit in accounting and finance? This isn't money. No, but we have to have the same rigor behind what we report into what we do for sustainability. So definitely leaning toward purpose. There are much more progressive companies, I would say, even than any of us in the room. But let me tell you, they have much bigger checkbooks.
Than you?
Yeah.
So you said something on the conference call the other day that has interested me, and I've been listening, that there's a difference between a carbon footprint that you would measure with a life cycle assessment versus scope 3. And, so in my mind, so I'm actually, you're talking to most of the room as your suppliers. You're actually one of my suppliers. And I'm thinking that it's not only your footprint upstream, but all of your suppliers' footprints, like a cradle to gate sort of footprint. What am I missing? Is there a nuance there?
So I'll give a little training and you pipe in. How does that sound? All right, if you are not familiar with Scope 3, there's 15 different categories in Scope 3. I'm not going to go through all of them.
Let's talk about Category 1.
Category 1. So Category 1 is suppliers. So all that means is that we're going to account for your Scope 1 and 2. In this case, the way that the greenhouse gas protocol works, we only work with our direct suppliers. Now what is happening is there is a potential, and I've seen it happen in the news, where in this case it was around child labor. They were mining I don't remember even what mineral it was. A journalist went in, they found out that this was happening. They actually traced through all the hands that mineral went to, and people like Ford, GM, were asked to give comment. How can you allow this to happen in your supply chain? Now that's hard, right? Because that at that point is a tier 4, 5, 8, 10. So I think even from a greenhouse gas perspective, we aren't there yet, but I could easily see that happening. Give you an instance, when we talk to our investors, when everybody says Scope 3, they always think about Category 1. Even when you talk to people who do carbon accounting, they say, oh, it's all Category 1. No, our largest footprint, very much like Cummins, and I'm assuming CNH is in the same boat.
11.
It's use of sold products, it's 11. So to give you relativeness for John Deere, Scope 3 Category 11 is 105 million metric tons. Whereas when you look at Category 1, it's just shy of 7 million. Our Scope 1 and 2, 700,000. right? So that is pretty clear about how we have to focus, right? However, the difference is when we go to the market, you can't say, well, we're only going to work on scope 3 or we're only going to work on our customers' emissions because scope 1 and 2 are table stakes. You have to keep doing them. They are like a ticket, as my boss always says, they're a ticket to get into the party. That's great if you work on your customers' emissions. That's the VIP lounge. Things you want to add?
No, I think, the way we say, we have control over scope 1 and 2.
Yep.
So why wouldn't we? And then it also connects in with our community aspect of it, right? So we're using the community's resources. We're using the community's, right, like the air emissions, right, impacts them. So we look at it, scope 1 and 2, as the community aspect of it, right? It's so small, like, they wouldn't even compare to in use. So that's how to keep, it's really hard for our facilities, HSC folks, when we first started, they're like, so we're kind of nothing in here, right? But that's not true, right? It's actually that impact directly to the community.
So we buy a lot of tractors out of Manheim. Do we get, do you have EPDs for those products?
Not to my knowledge, but I wouldn't be surprised. And Anita, I see you sitting back there. Do we do EPDs for Mannheim tractors? I don't think we do.
This is an area that I think as an industry, maybe we didn't go fast enough, right? Because once it, I always, like I said, okay, I feel like our team has done a good job when the business is prepared, right? They may not know exactly what they're prepared for, but we have to get them there. And so this is one where, the LCA was so expensive, it's almost like you needed, Josh to say, hey, guess what? Like, this is now a compliance issue. It's like, okay, so now we get it. But this is where sustainability has to be out in front because it's too late. We can't react now because so many people are coming to us saying, hey, we need this. And it's like, we need all this material and we needed years to be working on this, right? So this is the next big thing that's coming, the LCA, EPD, product category type stuff.
So Josh had mentioned 4. I'm assuming I could probably name some of the, it's probably the big truck OEM folks that are asking for it. Are these just private communications or is this going to be published? So
data centers are our biggest requester at this point. But now you're going to start seeing EU type companies. So, like a Kalmar, Scania, right? We're starting to get that level. So now you've got, and to me, it's a big eye opener because these are folks who have a big in-use footprint asking for it versus the data center. And so now that's the very beginning of this. And so we're going to get a lot more of it.
So one I want to add some color on, and I think I got some feedback earlier today that said, hey, Kim, you made this comment during the components meeting last week. I'd encourage you to make the same one. So as we think about it, you may say, well, that's great. John Deere, Cummins, and CNH, Caterpillar, and all of us OEMs are asking us for all this data. Why are you doing it? Why are you pushing us? I'll say encouraging. Because we're getting, so right, you see a lot of regulation. That's come up very clear today. Our customers are beginning to ask us for it. I can't tell you how many conversations I have with construction customers saying, when are you going to have zero tailpipe emission products for us to utilize on all of our construction projects? And then the last one, and I always hate this one, but they probably have the biggest piece, investors. If you are not an investor, or if you have someone else manage your money, look at where the Vanguards, the BlackRocks are all putting their money. They're putting it into ESG funds, environmental social governance funds. Those funds, as I said to the components meeting, follow the money. Where is the money going? What happens in a company like John Deere, if investors say, nope, we don't want to invest in you, it makes us harder to go out to the market and get capital. It makes it harder to issue debt and actually pay a good percentage in terms of interest rates. The last part is when it comes to investors, if they really don't like what they're doing, if you're a corporate or a public company, they'll come after you and say, we have a shareholder resolution. We disagree with what you're doing. You need to do it faster. You need to do it better. If those types of shareholder resolutions get approved, you think your life is miserable now, it gets worse. That is what happens on our end, and we will then, it kind of trickles down, right? So we want, as we think about this maturity model, to get it to the point where, hey, we want you to be ahead of the game so that when we do come and ask you things like through EcoVadis, or hey, we want you to report to CDP, you have a starting point.
But keep in mind that our economic model is still the way it is, right? That hasn't changed. So you will have the shareholders also who come to you and say, I don't want you to invest my money that way, right? So you've got both going on. So you do have to be careful. The way we talk about it is we have to make it good for all stakeholders, right? It has to be at this point, right? Because we want to keep our CEO, like he's our biggest champion of this. And so that is how you have to do it. What I say is if the money is not there, it will be, right? Because as things get worse, that societal pressure is going to cause governments to just snap. And we're going to have this crazy influx of regulations. So prepare now is what you're doing. That's what we're doing. We're doing push-ups to prepare for when the economics are right, and then we can take advantage of it.
So thank you, Kim. Testing. Thank you, Kim and Karen and Annalisa in the back for all the work that you've done on this. And that brings us to our next program.